Good evening, everyone. I'm very impressed to be here tonight and very honored to be invited by the Villa Albertine. Obviously, English is not my first language, so I hope it's gonna be okay. And tonight, what I'll be sharing is more of a scholar perspective than my experience, even though I can relate to what was said earlier about choosing a cause. And tonight I'm going to talk about two different education systems, which is the US one and the French one, to be put in perspective and in comparison. I was very interested in my dissertation about the current transformation of the education system that have take roots in transformations that have been led here and in Europe since the 80s. And I've been looking at what's been called the neoliberalization of education, which is actually a very big word that actually has different components. The first one that I was very much interested into was liberalization of education, which in the US appears as a very regular thing, like opening the public services to the private sector, which is not the case in France. Then the second wave of transformation that I was interested into was the marketization of public schools, meaning transforming a public service into a market options, meaning transforming schools into options that parents as consumers will pick, and you don't have to go to your local public school, you have many options in the city. Then the third component of this neoliberalization will be the privatization of public education. Obviously, my presentation was about access to public education, and nowadays in most countries, we have public education. And especially here, it's been right for a very long time. But what I was interested in too is how public and private sectors have had boundaries that are becoming more and more porous over time, meaning that the public sector goes into the private schools, but also how private funds, actors, regulations go into the public sector as well. So I'm going to give you a few examples to be more empirical, since I'm more of a geographer than a historian or politist, to give you a glimpse at what I call privatization of public education. My first example is here in the United States. Since the 90s has been developed as a system of charter school, which is very not developed in France, for example. And I was very interested in the fact that charter schools are named public schools in the US. But we can question the fact that are these really public schools? Charter schools are first implemented in the 90s as ways of getting self-governance and some freedom to teachers to do pedagogical experimentations. But over time, it's becoming a very big business in the country. And you have different types of charter schools I'm very aware of. Community organizations can make can make charter schools, but also very big companies called education management operators. I think most of you know some of them, like KIPP, for example, that is a nationwide charter schools operator. So in my dissertation, I was questioning the fact that are these really public? It's schools that are privately operated, that choose their children, their students most of the time, but are funded by public funds, so taxpayers' money. What I was very interested in is that over time, this system has been transformed. In some urban school districts, they created school catchment areas, charter schools, meaning that you have charter schools that would be replacing public schools, keeping their school catchment area. And so they recruit only the children from the area. It's been done, for example, in Philadelphia. They were named Renaissance schools. And there was a deal between big education management operators and the school district. The deal was, we authorize you to open a lot of charter schools, the regular ones, but in exchange, you have to take over some failing or so-called failing schools that were meant to be closed and school the children from the school catchment area. So there was no more regular neighborhood public schools in these areas, but only charter ones. A few years ago, that also happened in Atlanta. when the governor tried to implement the Opportunity School District and take over the worst performing school in the state, the school district, the Atlanta Public School District, chose to give away a whole cluster of the cities, a Carver cluster, which is the southeastern part of the city of Atlanta, which is also the poorest area, and asked two charter organizations to take over the schools in this area. So they asked two ones that already had regular charter school in the city called Kindesi schools and purpose-built schools. And so they asked them, since they already had a big experience in the city, to take over all the elementary, middle schools and half of the high school, because Carver High School is divided and the part that was early college one remained a traditional public high school. So what I'm interested into is the fact that this whole chunk of the city became privately managed, privately governed by this organization, but still funded by public schools, by public funds, sorry. So even if they're called public schools, what I'm saying is that you only have a privately managed option for kids in this whole area. So here we can see how the private goes into the public and how there is no more other option. Now to give you an example in France, because what I'm interested in is how it's changing in cities. Here we had a very marginalized area. We can see the same dynamics of privatization also in very attractive neighborhoods. The city of Marseille, which is located in southern France by the Mediterranean Sea, is one of the largest ones. And has a particularity in our country is that the center is the poorest area when the suburbs are the wealthiest, which is the contrary model of French cities, but mostly what you have more in American cities. About 25, 30 years ago, the central state decided to do a big redevelopment project in the city of Marseille, in the part that used to be the industrial harbor and had working class neighboring communities around. Marseille is known in France to have the worst schools of the country. A few years ago, they even called for a Marshall Plan for public schools. It's a direct reference to the Marshall Plan after World War II, obviously. You had pictures of ceilings falling off in schools, no, how do you say it? Water you can drink, drinkable water. I'm forgetting the word in English. Horrible water. Everything was in very bad shape, teachers, a high turnover of teachers, and the city saying, we don't have any money for the schools. At the same time, they had this big redevelopment operation in this very poor area that they wanted to transform in a world-class, attractive neighborhood for businesses, leisure, and also for high-end housing. But when you want to attract business, you also have to have qualified workers and their families, and so solutions for the kids to go to school, but not in the public school that were actually in the neighborhood. So the city implemented two strategies to implement new schools in the neighborhood to make sure that the new kids won't go to school with the other ones. The first solution was an elementary school that is a private, well, let's say charter private school in France, meaning that the fees are very low. It's about 400 euros a year. The teachers are paid by the government, but the school is private, so they choose the kids. The city paid for the land and for the construction of the building. It's a bilingual school. They paid for extra teachers. In French, cities don't pay for schools. It's a central state, but here Marseille chose to invest into that school. And they made a deal with the schools that they would only recruit people from the new high-end housing and exclude the kids from the neighborhood areas that were still living in the public catchment. So in this case, public money was used to fund a private school. Then these kids would go to middle and high school. At the same time, they're building now, and it's going to open in a few months or a few years, depending on how construction goes. They also chose to build the Marseille International Public High School, which is rare in France. We have only a couple in Paris. they chose to build a let's say, a national class high school that would have only international baccalaureate students, so only recruited on, not on the catchment area, but that would be living in the whole city, but it would be kind of your magnet programs in the US. So this school is a public school. It will be free, but will require students to have very high skill in language, so only students who already are bilingual and have this kind of skills. And also the central state created a special status for that school, so it's allowed to have private funds coming into the school, which is not authorized until now in France. A public school cannot have money from a private company or something, or foundation or anything. But this school will be able to. The idea for the school is to have all the new companies, the new businesses, to invest into that high-end international school in exchange of seats that would be reserved for the kids of these companies. So even though the school would be opened citywide, they will still have kids, the seats reserved for these people. Here again, it's a new way of seeing that porous border between public and private sectors, and how the line is becoming more and more blurred. And what I was willing to stress was various examples in the US in a very marginalized area. I could have taken a gentrifying one too, but also in France in a gentrifying one, but I could give you more examples about marginalized areas too, is that this privatization of education is actually a way for cities to build strategies of redevelopment and a way to deal with how neighborhoods go, either it's marginalization or gentrification. And to me, it also appears that even if we still have access to public education, the real question would be, do we have access to a quality public education? And is this quality public education for everyone? Or do we have to be part of another plan? I think my time is up, almost. So that was what I wanted to stress out, this privatization trend that actually is growing not only in France or in the US, but I'm in a current project that shows that it's a trend that is going in almost every country, southern and northern countries. And it's actually a really big tool because these areas really use schools as a way of attract people or evict people from their neighborhoods. I'll stop here.